So we did the DCW, the Digital Construction Week event, where we picked 4 questions and then tried to relate those questions in a very practical way, in terms of trying to see how we could, what were the answers on that. So we can show you. In fact, Richard can probably show those. And hello, Paul. What we've also done is this last couple of weeks, we've basically gone through and tried to do a refresh on the original guidance that was done. And that's been very useful because we've had, another set of eyes on all of the asset types. We've done all 12. And Richard's going through at the moment, updating the guidance with that. But one of the, I think, particularly useful things from my perspective is that we've had more people look at them than we had originally. So, for example, I think it was sprinkler systems, originally we only had probably 2 or 3 people engaged in that. And they did a good job, but everybody's got a perspective, haven't they? Whereas this time we had a much bigger group looking at them, and all of that I think is just contributing to it. I think it's and the other thing that we had one last Thursday that Jim was very actively part of on signage. Now, as a layperson like me, you'd have thought that signage was pretty straightforward and fairly clear, but I've come to learn that that's not the case. And in fact, when we were doing we've been as Active Plan, we've been doing floor plans for with some big scan to BIM surveying companies for Tower Hamlets and Origin Housing and various other ones. And what we were trying to do was come up with a standard set of symbols. Yeah, what symbols should you use for an AOV? What symbols should you use for And I spoke to Jim on it, and he said, "Well, actually, there aren't any. There's stuff, isn't there, Jim, that has been discussed, but there's no definitive standard. And what we've had to do is to arrive at something that is a compromise." And
well, no, because in the standards, they're laid down as notices because they're for fire and rescue and not for the general public. I mean, the case in point of everything that I spoke about on Thursday is over Andrew's left shoulder, because here we have a sign that theoretically is supposed to be illuminated internally, but it isn't. So it's relying on viewing distance from an external light source. And we debated that for about half an hour. The graphical symbol is not standardized anywhere in the world, but it's being used as being familiar and understood by the whole of Andrew's office environment. And yet research has shown it's not understood because the rectangle, the white rectangle, is very difficult to resolve, and it's open to assumption. In certain context, it could be a changing room. In certain context, it could be a cubicle, another room, but we're left as an assumption to understand what the graphical symbol means. So that absolutely galvanizes everything about our group in the design, because these things should be laid down fundamentally as an arrangement from day one. But that one is a sticky thing stuck on a luminaire that the engineer gets out of a box, and if it happens to be the right one, lucky. If it's not, it's my old Airfix Spitfire that was half ME 105 on one side, because that's what the little symbols were in the box of Airfix, or a proper Spitfire decals on the other side. But anyway, I illustrate my point about signs, and I think in retrospect, last Thursday, we made the whole thing so complicated, because you're right. That's the standards committee, we spend huge amounts of time building a registration system for graphical symbols, which are safety signs. But then there's a lot of other things like fire and rescue deployment. There's, which is about dry risers and about other pieces of equipment. And the plethora of graphical symbols, there's a test method to make sure people understand it. So currently, the notice for dry riser is dry riser in text, because the committee make the assumption that fire and rescue sources in the UK can speak English, because that's an international safety language, so they can read the text, but it's got flames on it as a determinant, meaning it's for firefighters. So there is a vocabulary for it. And as I say, unfortunately, very few people, my committee know these things, but externally, outside that, everybody assumes and makes an assumption that signs are easy. And so they should be, because they're communication, and so we should understand them. But when we start to look at them, like the one over Andrew's shoulder, we have to be critical about it, because what does the arrow actually mean?
Well, the other thing, Jim, that I actually misspoke earlier, because I was talking about signs, whereas actually what I was talking about, what I meant to be talking about, was CAD symbols. Yeah. So the point is, there's no standard for CAD symbols for a lot of these things either. So I mean, you're absolutely right that there's.
Well, that's not correct, because there's CAD symbols as a British standard for the old fire certification plans. It's still there. It was never taken back. So, and again, this was also coming out on Thursday about what the definition is of fire safety sign. People wanted to take it off on other tangents, but fire safety signs as a definition. A safety sign as a definition. And the definitions, and there was a comment from somebody that said, oh, well, we want to call it signage. But internationally, in standardization, it's called signing. But because we've always called it that way, and we put out a contract for signage, and this is not correct, because if you want an expert like me to come and do you a safety sign survey and tell you what you want, you make it into all signage, you're going to have me looking at everything like, do not put your bike here, because that's a sign. It's not keeping what it should be as an arrangement for fire safety. And that's this forum specifically after Grenfell, specifically because there's been a problem in communication.
Yeah, I guess the point I was trying to make was that what's become clear from the various different workshops is that there are different views. And part of that is how people interpret the guidance. So for example, just on the location and positioning of signs, there was a conversation as to whether they should be at eye height. I can't remember if that was the term, but higher in, against maybe at 6 foot, or at 300 mil. I don't want to get into the detail,
you
Jim.
must be feeding me, because
Jim,
there's a specific height for an escape route sign, and it's 2 meters. That one's way above 2 meters above Andrew's thing. It's specific. It's 1.7 meters on walls for escape route signs. Yeah. It's already in the standard, and it's very prescriptive.
Yeah, but the point I was making was that it isn't that clear. It may be in that standard, right? But the point that Andy Cunningham, who is also a specialist in signs, right, he makes is that the signs should be lower down because of smoke.
Yes, but that's already covered in another standard for safety way guidance systems, low location safety way guidance systems. And yeah, I totally agree. But because it's never been prescribed in law, and I come back to this thing that I was talking about with the GIS, which is the difference between compliance and conformance. If you want to do a safety way guidance system and you can go above code, it's perfectly correct. That is the place to put them. But again, in this context, we need to deal with what the current guidance is under ADB. And unfortunately, there's no guidance in ADB for safety way guidance systems. It's only a recommendation.
Good. Okay. I hope my point's been made.
And I've probably done what I normally do is and thank you for helping me yet again, is to try and put this thing at a higher interest level. I hope I do that.
No, you do. So the point is that if, for example, a landlord is asking for an expert's view of whether they're complying or not, it does appear that having one expert's view may not be adequate. We need to have that consolidation of views so that the the safety angle is being properly covered. Anyway, that was a long way around, but yeah, we've got the new guidance coming out, haven't we, Richard?
Sorry, my mic was off. Yes, we certainly have, and believe me, I'm on it. And since he's on the call, and thank you very much to Paul White for doing dampers. I've just got to go through the chat for the meeting to see we haven't missed anything and put stuff in to the appendix.
Excellent. Okay.
And so, George, were these sort of these guidance that you took? So I wasn't involved in the roundtables, but these are sort of updates to the guidance for the specific assets that everyone's been working on. Is that kind of correct?
Yeah, we've done 12 asset types. In fact, actually, what I'll do, I'll just show you what we did at Digital Construction Week, because that will help put context to that. Yeah, so in fact, just for anybody that's not aware, this is what we did 18 months ago that we fed back into the Golden Thread process. So we produced guidance for the 12 asset types that are set out there. And that's what we've been refreshing. So this is what the fire door one includes. What is the risk it mitigates? What do people do to the fire door to stop it from working? What information do we need for specification, construction, installation? And we've done that now for all of those different asset types. Then this is what we did at Digital Construction Week, that both Pauls that are on this call at the moment and Jarek as well contributed to. The first question that we came up with was, how do we prevent incorrect design, selection, installation of fire safety products? And that was the group, and we had some good outputs from that. We probably need to decide how we're then going to use this information. I've not really had the time to think through that yet, and I'd be grateful for people's views so we can share these. And then the next one was that was one table. Another table was how do we ensure that what information is captured about a product is actually related and can then be updated through the lifetime. So I'll just explain the context of this. We, as Active Plan, we're doing some work at the moment for Barnet Council, and they've asked us to create something that pulls together their safety case information, fire risk assessments, external wall surveys, and all their O&M information, so that they've actually got something that's joined up. What they've also asked us to do is tie in some live sensor data from the emergency lighting system and the sensors that are in the flats. So as we were going through building it up, what we discovered was that they had two different fire stopping data sets. They got one from the fire risk assessment that was done probably 2 or 3 years ago, had resulted in some fire stopping work that was recorded in a software application called Bolster. And when we then started going through this with them, we found that they were also using the current work was on fire stopping was being done using an application from Hilti. So we asked them how they were using the Bolster information. So in other words, if they've got fire collars that were inspected 2 or 3 years ago and remedial works were done to them, how was that then being fed into the new system, Hilti? And it wasn't. Basically, it was a completely discrete record of that work. And it then became clear to us that what was happening was each time somebody does an inspection, they're creating a brand new data set. So therefore, there's no history of what was inspected last time around, which is a fundamental break in the golden thread. And that's broadly because the client didn't have a good record, maybe from a baseline to work from, to say what that asset was from their perspective, irrespective of who's doing the inspection and the remedial works. So that's part of what we were saying here. So that particular group looked at this, and we came up with this methodology to say that each asset that is then being inspected needs to be identified, and then any inspection work or any maintenance work that's done against it needs to be against that particular asset, which that may sound blindingly obvious. I appreciate I'm in a design group here, but I think it just shows the importance of actually feeding through to the asset team exactly what's been installed. The other question that we had was, how do we ensure that the building safety data is actually a live thing, not simply a report, a snapshot in time? And the reason we're doing that is that we are finding that, understandably, landlords are under a lot of pressure at the moment, and what they're doing is they're registering their buildings. They may be commissioning a building safety case report, but what they're not realizing is that's got to be kept live and up to date. So this group here, led by Andrew Holly, was working on this, and we're working with this company now, Riskbase, who they provide risk management software to be managing that through. So this was the findings that came from there as well. So I think we're getting some really rich data. And then the final thing was, how do we deal with this problem of building services design being done after the rest of the design is complete and during construction? And that's something that Paul McSorley's very passionate about. So he led this particular group, and then we went through that side of things there. So that's my report from DCW.
That's really it's really cool, George. And so, I mean, pretty comprehensive. Now, the question in terms of we asked where could it be located. Now I've just sort of been just before everyone joined, there's some slides. I think one of yourselves or someone in the team, I think, sent through from the Building Safety Regulator conference, which I've sort of been going through because I wanted to kind of refresh my mind in terms of things that are moving. And I had a couple of general questions for everyone, very basic, but I think important questions to make sure I'm on the right page as well. But one thing I noticed, George, is obviously there's a lot of links to like the HSE website in terms of, you know, that here's, for example, the new Gateway 1 planning advice link, for example, which is a new thing that I didn't really know about till I was looking at this. So the HSE have kind of created this planning advice web app that allows, you know, developers to, you know, ask questions at that early stage to meet Gateway 1, for example. So I've been sort of just in one of my OneNotes, rewriting and kind of updating myself about things from these various presentations. So could it be that some of the findings from the groups, and I guess at the moment it's probably in the BIM4Housing website, could there be a discussion with the HSC about links to those findings so that, you know, 'cause it has a general section about, you know, golden thread. You know, it just sort of says the right information at the right time to the right people. And in the HSC website, that your building information must be kept digitally, kept securely, etc., etc. But maybe there's links from the HSC website to your findings, which may then kind of keep it centralized, I guess. But I mean, that's obviously quite a, you know, that's a kind of government website, etc., and they would want them to make sure the information is, you know, censored or checked or whatever. But could that be a portal, or could that be a way? Or
I
have you
think
already had that discussion?
No, we haven't. The HSE, a couple of people from the HSE were actually at the workshops at DCW, but I don't know. Yeah, it's a good idea. At the moment, I'm just trying to think through, you know, as I say, Paul White, Paul McSorley, and Jarek were actually on those workshops. Paul White, do you have a view as to how we could take what we did and then turn it into something that is, as Daz is saying there, consumable by people? You're on mute, Paul.
I suppose we can perhaps pick a trade association or the group that Paul McSorley's in and publish it through that, if we come up with a format.
Yeah, it was more about how I'm just trying to get my head around how to take the great comments that people made and then turn it into something that is usable. Maybe it's something that we feed into some sort of risk management questionnaire or something like that.
Yeah, well, we'd say it could be, if we could put it into a form of FAQ and then put answers to the questions.
Oh, that's a good idea. Yeah.
And then, as you say, send it to.
I mean, we've got answers. Those are answers to the questions, though, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Good
But
for you,
sorry,
George.
the-
Actually, it's just again on the HSE website, just sort of seeing where they talk about different templates that they've got for, say, the kind of the planning stage. So could it be simply a very simple checklist of these sort of prompts or prompts list?
yeah,
That is as simple as that. It is simply a list that people could download and use to check their processes against or their workflows against. So it's not really yeah, obviously this is all guidance, but it's just in a downloadable format, just as a PDF, simple PDF that people can use internally. Whether they want to digitize it internally or not, that's obviously up to them, I guess. But just as a set of prompts was what I was
well,
thinking.
that makes absolute sense. But there's some of those already, and I'm trying to think because I was looking at one yesterday, and I think it was Richard gave that link to Building Regulation 156, and we could perhaps help with making it as in terms of making sure people have got the right information, because this is a lot of this is about the law being very simple, and with the law and the guidance being very simple, people avoid doing any work, and therefore they don't consider everything as a whole. I'm trying to think what on earth it was I was reading yesterday that was good guidance. I think it was the one from the insurance BDM01, is it? From the FIA that again there was some links going around to, and I downloaded that, and there's quite a good section in there which says really you should be doing this and this before you even get to this point. But again, it involves people who don't normally doing stuff that they don't think they should be doing. But I think this is where everything's starting to change, in the fact that design really does need to be design, and construction and whatever needs to be construction, because just waiting now to see if it's going to work when you get to it is clearly becoming more and more unacceptable.
yes, I think you're right.
Makes sense. Well, I guess it's if anyone is, I guess what we want to do is try and reduce the number of clicks or whatever that you need to do to get to the findings from the round tables. Hence why I thought the HSE might be quite good, because I guess that's where a lot of people would go. I mean, that's where I would search for any kind of guidance or help on this matter, or gov.uk or something like that. So if you do speak to the HSE representatives over there and ask them, well, could it be a simple checklist? Could it be a prompt list? That for me, that would be the way to get the most coverage, let's say. I guess.
I think you're right.
If that's actually a route, that would be just as much a route for our actual overall guidance, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
For actually our asset guidance.
Exactly. Because it's gone through so many knowledgeable people in the various groups that it's going, simply speaking, that's got to be as good as anything else that the government bodies would be doing. And that's why we're all here, I guess. So if because you do have connections with the HSE directly, that would make sense to me, to ask them at least. So
it's worth a shot, isn't it? Certainly.
Yeah, so the good work is done. But if I may, I just wanted to bring it back to a couple of very basic questions. Like I said, I was trying to kind of refresh my mind with all the information that's been coming from various sides. First one, I think I saw again a post from you, George, about the HSE not necessarily being the building safety regulator anymore. There was another body, or there was talk of that. Now, I don't really know whether it changes anything from a designer point of view, because whether we've got to submit it to or whether the building safety regulator arm of HSE or not, if the process hasn't changed and the timelines haven't changed as designers, it doesn't make much difference in my mind. It's just knowing who it is. But I don't know if there's any more information about that. But I know there was sort of murmurings of the HSE not being the kind of overseer anymore.
Yeah, my understanding is, and it's I don't think anybody knows at the moment, but what I think's happened is that the secondary legislation has gone to, or the legislation has gone to the House of Lords for approval, and the Baroness Scott, I think it was, who I think she's been part of Deluxe. So although she's in the House of Lords, she's obviously been very closely involved with Deluxe and Michael Gove. What they've done is they've introduced the possibility of the regulatory authority, a new regulatory authority being set up, which some people I've spoken to have said that that's probably going to mean that it's going to be more stringent, because to some extent, the regulator being under the HSE is going to potentially soften it, because the HSE is there to encourage people to do the right thing, as it were. And therefore, this was a view that one of the people that seems to be very knowledgeable about this said to me. It's a bit difficult for the HSE to then become the enforcer, because they've got both hats, as it were. Whereas if a new regulator is set up to enforce the legislation, and HSE is there to support the legislation, then that's a positive thing. The other thing is that the HSE at the moment, from a government perspective, it reports into the HSE is under a different government department. I can't remember what it is now, but it's not under Deluxe. It's under. Does anybody else know what government department the HSE is under?
No.
I think.
I know what you mean, George, and
never really thought about it, to be honest with you, George. You know that. Never even thought about it.
Yeah. So the fire is under the Home Office,
Yeah.
right?
Like.
And building safety is in theory under Deluxe, but the HSE reports into a different government department. So that's one of the things that I've learned just in this last week. So I think what they're trying to do is trying to clarify it so that there's a stronger regulatory body there that can take enforcement action. That's what I think is happening.
Joe, I think you just posted something, didn't you, Joe? That little quick Google search.
Just a quick Google, and it says the Department of Work and Pensions.
That's it. The HSE. That's exactly it. Which is
strange.
Quite different, isn't it?
So there's going to be a lack of work and no pension out of this then.
And then the other basic questions that I had is, again, I kind of get stuck on this quite a lot, but have they changed the height sort of parameter for relevant buildings now? Because I've seen 3 heights now, 11, 15 and 18. Is it still 18 for a relevant building, or has it gone down? Does anyone?
Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? From a fire perspective, my understanding is it's all buildings. Yeah. The 18-meter rule only relates to the Building Safety Act, not the Fire Safety Act.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, no. Generally, everything's for everything, but then the additional bits for HRBs is anything then comes in over, I think it's 18 meters, and then there's some considerations at 11, but I think HRBs are basically starting at 11. No, sorry, 18.
Well, I had a number of one-to-one conversations on the Fire Safety Act with landlords, a lot of housing associations, and they were all working on the basis that that only applied to over 18 meters.
Yeah, they're wrong.
Really?
Oh yeah, definitely.
Wow. No, I mean, some of them have gone lower because they know it's going to become lower, but they were all working on the basis that legally it only had to be above 18 meters.
I think
that's extraordinary.
It is for reporting.
There's a difference between some of the prescriptive measures and the management. The management side of it is actually for any, including homes of multiple occupation. So the management comes in and then it's 11 meters and then it's 18 meters, but it's the prescriptive requirements over 18 meters. That's
if it's the Fire Safety, if the Fire Safety Act applies to all residential buildings, then it applies to all residential buildings. But I can tell you that
no,
I haven't spoken
Richard,
to anyone that was doing. Sorry.
Yeah, it's all buildings.
Yeah, I'm believing you. I'm astonished.
No. You just said it's all residential buildings.
Sorry, all buildings. Yeah, but in terms of us, and I can absolutely tell you, and I must have had 20 or 30 meetings with major housing associations, local authorities, and every single one of them was working on the basis that it had to be, that it was over 18 meters. Every single one of them, and these were the people doing it, not somebody in a different department or something. So that's quite astonishing.
Yes, I think when it comes to the Fire Safety Act, it's all buildings, all use classes, and all heights. When it comes to the new build, let's say the definition of relevant, like I said, I've kind of extracted from various, either the HSC or the government documents, and obviously we know we've got housing or blocks of flats or homes with sort of two or more of them. Student accommodation is now been included. I'm saying these, just kind of contradict me if I'm got this wrong, but from the list that I've been seeing, I've got flats, student accommodation, hospitals and care homes, but they need to go through like the gateways for design and construction only, not the management side. Prisons, hotels, boarding houses, and hostels. Is that list correct? And I also have different heights for those. Like I said, I've got 11 meters for flat student accommodation, hospitals, care homes, prisons, but 18 meters for hotels, boarding houses, and hostels. And I don't know whether someone there's a website or a link which has the definitive definition now of a relevant building anymore. But like I said, this is extracted from the BSR slides and from like the HSE website info. So I don't know if everyone else is clear. Some others are clearer. And then the only other one was sprinklers was mandatory when it's 11 FFL finished ground level to the finished floor level is 11 meters or more. Sprinklers are mandatory, and that's 11 meters.
Is that on new build?
New build, that's right. Yeah.
I didn't know that. Yeah.
So yeah, flat student accommodation and I think they call it institutional sort of buildings. I guess that's prisons. And then they talk about hostels, hotel, and boarding houses, which are kind of expanded, and then the care home has also come in. Is that? I mean, I don't know, Joe, whether from an architectural point of view within the office, these are kind of the right use classes and the types of buildings that is internally in discussions with yourselves, or not.
I'm not sure. I mean, I think I've got the same reaction as Richard. Really, there's an awful lot of confusion around this. I think I'd have to ask our building surveying team, because they're the guys that are dealing with this more. But the priority does seem to be the 18. Anything that's high risk, 18 meters and above. That's what I see going on in the office at the moment.
And that's what I have for new builds, definitely. For anything which is residential, definitely. But like I said, there are these other sort of because it used to be just simply dwellings, and then now they've obviously started to add things like the hotels, kind of boarding, because people are sleeping. I mean, that's the general driver, isn't it? If someone is sleeping in these buildings, whether it's for one night or multiple, or living there, then that seems to be the trigger, and that seems to be why they've added things up. But yeah, like I said, I'm a little bit confused because I've still got different levels being mentioned, 11, 15, and 8, and also different sectors or use classes being defined. So what I will do is I'll share my kind of what I've done is I've kind of tried to summarize the gateway timelines and what's required. There's a couple of diagrams that I've extracted from the building safety regulator conference, and then a couple of diagrams of the height definitions. I'll share that with everyone. Yep. It will be good to kind of, and I'll share the link to all the slides as well. But it will be good because these are, for me, obviously, from a design point of view, these are quite basic questions which I should know, but when I research, I'm not so sure. And then the only two other things that are going to impact us as designers and suppliers, and in terms of the projects, is the need for this sort of as-built specification and as-built drawings, which is theoretically changes everything in terms of what do we kind of provide. So for example, obviously we issue final record because we don't go around remeasuring, let's say, the installation and checking that every build up is exactly as per our drawings. We obviously keep up to date if we've been informed by the contractor because it's a VE exercise or a pure design change from the client or whoever. So those kind of things we are keeping a tab on and tracking in our documentation. But the fact that it specifically says that the final record can't be issued as final record, it has to be as built information. That puts quite a lot of onerous responsibility on, let's say, from an architectural set of drawings. How do we know exactly that is how it's been built? And I don't think anyone's necessarily answered that yet, but it'll affect, I guess, all of us.
Yeah, I've got something to contribute on what you just said there, but I know Jim's had his hand up for a little while. So
I'll just be quick because my reading and understanding of this from day one, and that's why I'm on the design group, is so much now is theoretically influenced by the risk assessment. It used to be the old purpose group of building,
yeah,
but now the one arbiter of arrangements within the building is the person that's carrying out the risk assessment. Now, if that risk assessor decides to just use the old basis for purpose group of building, then he's not actually taking in some of the new risks involved. So from my perspective, now in the design side, we do really have to lean on the person that does the risk assessment with the developer or with the property owner to determine what that risk matrix is, regardless of what height it is. But as I say, with all the different types of building that you mentioned, Andrew, it's perfectly correct because the risk matrix is different for all of them and you can't have one thing that fits everything. So it's the risk assessment that will determine the arrangements.
I agree. And one of the things that Steve Coppin, who's our sort of guru on the CDM and the safety side of things, said is that the risk assessment obviously is the critical thing here, and if you like, that is going to be the driving force. And the point he's made, for example, what does HRRB stand for? What does it stand for?
High risk residential buildings.
Well, that's exactly what it originated on, Jim, and that's the point that Steve's made. But they changed it to high-rise residential buildings, right?
Which are just one form of HRB, which is a high-risk building.
Exactly.
Which is what I think they're aiming for.
Yeah. Now, depending on it, he gets quite cross with the HSE over this because they've changed the terminology from HRR, high risk residential building, to high rise residential building, and he thinks they did that intentionally because it cuts back on their responsibilities. But
yeah, but I've got a problem with it, even the definition of high risk, because we've had this long running debate that's going parallel to this about PEEPs and people with disabilities. So and the HSE haven't come clean with that. And one of the reasons why I don't think that they want enforcement things is because of how it impacts onto social services for people. So I still think that eventually us in design will have to determine what the risk matrix is ourselves and where that is in high risk, because a high risk can still be a home of multiple occupation. If you've got 5 or more, let's say immigrants from Syria or whatever that don't speak English, have got an elderly grandmother, young children in single bedroom, you've got a whole bunch of risks to do with fire, then that needs our discussion in design.
Yeah, absolutely.
And the arrangements.
Paul, you've got your hand up.
Yes, I was just going back to sorry, Paul. So yeah, it was just going back to the fact that this is where design is design. Going back to our previous subject, where if you want to make changes that are significant, you're going to have to run them back through the HSE anyway, and therefore you should be tracking those changes and your as-built. So nowadays, design is not a wish list anymore. It really has got to reflect the as-built, and you're going to have to keep all the drawings completely up to date on a daily basis.
Yes.
So if somebody does something different, then you've really got to make sure that you're tracking that.
Yes.
So I mean, it's only. And I was brought up in the old days of engineering in a manufacturing shop, and we couldn't change anything without informing 10 people and getting it signed off by 3 people above us. But every drawing that was issued was always up to date, and we've lost that. We've lost that skill,
that rigor. Yeah.
I think
that nobody has to check anything, or it's just peer reviewed by the guy who's sitting next to you. Oh yeah, that's all right, and we're not actually reviewing anything. And I think we're going to find our ways back into this because I don't think there's any choice.
Agreed.
Paul McSully.
I'll come back to
I was going to say, no, it's really interesting because I think when you look at, I think, Jim, your language on purpose group is also refreshing when you hear it, and it's good because I work in construction, and, obviously, Paul does a bit of work with us as well. You don't always hear this kind of language being used, which is good because I think when you look at purpose group and you look at risk of space is affected by purpose group. So the hard bit is, I think, even for you, Andrew, is that you sort of end up going that you've actually got to know every space in the building, what classification of risk is associated to it. And it'll even apply to emergency lighting and things like that. It will do, because some things are on escape routes, some things aren't. And this all affects actually what you've got to do to the wall, what goes through it all, how you treat the space. This could become really hard getting to your point, Andrew, about how you actually track this for thread purposes. You're going to end up, and I can't figure out the best way to portray it, because I've sent you those Excels as well, Jules, which lists out how you do the ontology for pipe work, and it's mega complicated, and dampers. Obviously Paul goes through with us as well to make sure it's all kept honest. You look at it and you go, you've got to record that for every single location in the building, link it back to the detail from the manufacturer who's done the seal to make sure that's correct in an as-built condition. Then you need to have the original drawings from yourself that says we had a hole here. Refer to this, which tells you the detail. It's going to be really difficult because you're not going to do it on one set of drawings. And my biggest fear is, and hopefully you'll agree with this, and I'm looking at you, Jim, for this one, is that Navis is a great tool, but it's fluffy. you can't actually see the detail in it. You need to have a good set of drawings to actually understand what is there. And that's what I'm finding. You can't see it in model space very well at the moment. So that was my bit there. It was just good to hear it all. That's all. So
no, I think the you know, rewinding everything back. I mean, within the office here, we're kind of assuming everything is a relevant building, generally speaking, because that seems like the from a de-risking and
I think you're
assuming
right.
assuming going forward. Obviously, a lot of clients will not necessarily want to do everything that a relevant building needs to be done, but that's sort of where we're starting as the baseline on the assumption that these heights will kind of come down and encompass all buildings, all sectors, whatever. So we're kind of starting from that as opposed to trying to figure out what the limit is and then kind of work just above that. In terms of the final record or as built nature of things, I guess the as I say, Paul, the tricky thing is we can draw and stuff, but then you're relying on, as you say, the contractors, the specialists, etc., to feed back up the chain to inform of various changes, and that has either some sort of, as I say, going forward on a relevant building, that clearly has to be done on a formal basis. So theoretically, change should be very little, which is great for everyone, I think, as we spoke before. But that does need, sort of this feeding back up the chain to say, we've actually changed the wall build up here. It wasn't a variation, but it's just something that we had to do on site. But to get someone on site to kind of feed back all of those changes, and it's going to be unrealistic for a number of things. But again, I think we have to start with trying to get maybe 80% of, the 80-20% rule, where let's get 80% of it right, if possible. The 20% may be critical, but if you don't start, we're never going to be able to get into that thing. But it does require, at the moment, we would simply ask the contractor, okay, here is the final record information we issued for construction. Can you inform us and mark up any other changes that you're aware of during the design and build project or the phase that we need to be aware of? And they may do a markup. And this is happening live on a couple of residential schemes, which don't fall within the relevant heights or fall into relevant building category. But we're basically saying, look, here are the drawings that we issue for final construction. Has anything else changed? And that's the only way that we're kind of trying to capture anything that might have happened. But the design managers and who are walking around aren't necessarily going to know everything that's changed or everything that's been built differently. They will just do it on a either because they know or because they can physically see that partition isn't where it's in our drawing and provide a markup. That's the kind of level of I don't know, accuracy that we're getting back. I mean, some other contractors, I'm sure, are doing like the point cloud surveys to make sure that every wall is adjusted slightly to match final record, the as-built scenario. But that's probably a minority rather than a majority at the moment.
I think there's a lot of things going on at the moment where people are using technology to create their golden threads, but they're not being brought together. So you've got people that are using things like Hollow Builder and Open Space and things like that. And I think largely contractors, I mean, Jarek's probably better placed to comment on this, but what that's doing, it's creating a discrete set of information that you can, it looks pretty cool, that you can walk through afterwards and see how things were, what's been installed and what's missing. And it's being done, I think, largely for valuations and things like that. But because I've not seen anybody then taking that and then reinterpreting it back in to produce the as-builts. Now, maybe they are. People are using Revitsu and things like that for doing snagging and recording things. But again, I don't know whether there's any budget then for people to actually update their information. But what I found interesting. We were having a conversation on fire doors in this recent session, and there was a debate between the fire door suppliers and the asset management, or the people that were interested in the asset management information. And somebody mentioned Regulation 38, which actually, from a fire perspective, is something that does require information that is otherwise seen as confidential actually to be reported. So the asset information, and I guess the as-built does, which is basically, I think, what you're saying as well, that is a legal requirement for the delivery team to complete. And yet, how often is that actually being delivered? I would say probably very little.
Well, I've got first-hand experience because the last 10 years I've been on about Regulation 38, and it's just been the M&E manual. They have failed to bring across specialist contractors stuff in the Regulation 38 paperwork that's handed over to the building owner or the manager. And I've been banging that drum for 10 years.
Okay,
So
well, I am now as well,
the
Jim.
legislation. That is the legislation. That's all you've got to produce. The golden thread is a wish list.
Yeah.
The one piece of legislation is Regulation 38, and that doesn't say as built. It says what's the situation now, because you're supposed to update that Regulation 38. You don't necessarily.
Oh, is that right?
You don't necessarily have to have history, but you do have to have. It has to be handed over from a new building, or you have to start again if you haven't got it. So you have to put a datum in the as a line in the sand. And I've had this discussion with regulators, with specifically the fire and rescue inspection, and they didn't even know about Regulation 38 as far as fire is concerned. They thought that was just, as I say, an M&E handover, so that how you turn on the central heating and stuff like that.
But specifically, I mean, certainly what I've read, because I've just looked up Regulation 38, it expressly says fire safety.
Yes. And I've been saying to people now that, you know, your for instance, your smoke control design needs to be complete, and you should be handing that over as building 38, because if somebody else comes to inspect the building, they're going to need to know what you've designed. Otherwise, they're going to have to condemn it because basis is. Otherwise, you know, I mean, you might have made some, if you fire engineered it in any way, they need to know that because you went and looked at it and it didn't do what you're expecting it to do from a so-called compliance system. Then you need to refer back to the design information, and that really then, as you say, should form part of the BR38 stuff.
Jarek, have you got a view on this?
Yeah, so it's true that many people don't even know about the regulation from where I stand, and don't know really what to do with it. Going back to your previous comments regarding how to capture the information, so we work with few contractors who do point cloud scans free of charge, because they can benefit financially from it afterwards, but they release the information free of charge. That's the only way to really capture the as-built information. And the better way of doing it is companies like BuildDots, you probably heard. So we generally have a technological and financial barrier to capture this. It seems to me that technology like BuildDots is the way to go to capture this information accurately, and then have the golden thread. Everything else, it's manual, and it will introduce error, and there'll be some omissions and error, basically. I can't see any other way of then automating it by scanning photogrammetry point clouds or something like that.
But if somebody's using BuildDots, all that BuildDots does is identifies where there are differences.
And whether it's done according to design.
Yes, but what if it's not done according to design? is there a workflow that then updates the information? I don't know
So
whether there is.
So it just highlights checks. It does checks and highlights whether it has been done correctly to the design or not, or it's not done yet, or it's done incorrectly, and flags it out, sends a report, and then you have to do something about it. That's just a reporting tool.
But do you know anybody that's actually using that to update the as-builts?
Not personally built that. I haven't experienced this. I had just had a few email exchange with some people from Build Dots when I was doing my research. So not like hands-on.
Okay. Paul.
Yeah, no, so I was going to say, good to see you, Anna. Just saying hi there, by the way.
Hello.
No, it's interesting that the one thing that is really the bit that's getting us all into a pickle is that I know Build Dots, I know all the other. I've been through everything with them. The holy grail we need to fix is you need a mechanism that you know what it was to meet the risk of the space in the building, then how it changes to the end. Because all of these systems, build-ups, reverse operants, all these ones, all the great systems, but the one thing they cannot do is tell you the thing is functionally correct for the hazard of the space. And that's the bit that's really hard to get right. Does that make sense? You know, that if you know that the room's got an EIS risk and you need W for a vision panel on a door, that is not traceable in that system at the moment, because unfortunately those templates don't exist for all that different classification information for those products. That's the hard bit. So it's got usability and function, but you still got to make sure what goes into the R&M is right, because I think someone said it recently that you might end up, if you're not careful, with a record that's digitally recorded and it just comes back loading the gun to incriminate you later on, because actually it's functioning correct for the space, but you've got a nice record of it. And we're kind of seeing that happening, you know, in some instances as well. So over to Anna, sorry.
Thank you.
That's right, mate.
George, I just wanted to follow up on your point about kind of federated golden threads. I think we're now at a point where I think we're all going to get much better delivering as builds. Quite who's going to pay for this? I don't yet know, because there's a very unclear grey area at the end of the project of the kind of from what's been designed as a design, and then what's been built and what's actually being handed over to the client, so that the client can manage the building and manage the updates to that building as things progress. Yeah, I'm working with lots of different clients as we're handing over our designs, and also with some clients who are actually having designs from other architects and are trying to work out how to manage their buildings in the future. My point is we need a new type of PDF, something that everyone can read. We don't have those things yet. Very complicated digital twins are obviously available, but I think it's a long way until our clients will be completely ready to take those on and maintain them. So in between those two extremes, we do need to find several very simple strategies for clients to be able to receive information, keep on top of it with their FM departments or whoever, and then be able to manage the building. So I think this space is very much for development, and the biggest issue is that it's not really making money for anyone at the moment. So if it was, lots of people would jump on it. So what Build Dots do and what Digital Twin does is, you know, we're part of this conversation very much, is giving you solutions, but you still have to spend quite a lot of money to get those solutions in place, and then you have to spend money to keep them maintained. So I don't think we have a fully kind of, you know, fully resolved situation. I think this is going to take a couple of years until it settles. I don't know if everyone agrees, but
no, I think so, and I'd be I just sort of gonna ask, be quite interesting, because I know last time you spoke, you're obviously going live through a relevant building in terms of the stages. How is that going? Because I guess it's nothing more so than the proof is in the, you know, in the eating,
in the pudding.
Is the proof is in the eating, or the proof is in the pudding? I never remember which the phrase is, but Yeah, because obviously
Yeah.
last time I think you spoke,
Yeah,
you'd
one
obviously
of
tried to follow everything, but then there's some subcontractors who had kind of
Yes.
gone up, gone bust, etc.
still there, still there. The live project that approaching Gateway 2, the contractor as the subcontractor with whom we've developed the entire builders work strategy is no more, and now there is a big argument of who will take the risk, or whether the new subcontractor will actually have to redesign everything, and we will have to then obviously submit a variation. And so and not progressing very quickly on this. Yeah.
Anna, you hit the nail on the head. Who's going to pay? And this really
Absolutely.
is the real crux of the matter, because I'm on the manufacturing side as well, and for years I would be looking at drawings that would have mistakes on them, and when I went back and said, look, these got mistakes on them, to the procurement, they would say, oh, can you put the changes on there for me and send it back, and we'll send it out to all of the other people tendering for this business so that they can tender for the right specification. Well, after a while, we had two options. We either just discarded the possibility to quote for the business, or we rubbed our hands saying we can quote for the cheapest possible solution because somebody in designers got it wrong. Now, I've been advocating that specialist contractors, and I hope Paul will, that we need to be called in at design stage, and we need to be able to charge for that design service, taking into account everything that we've written and done over the last 6 months. Because, as I say, I still look over Andrew's shoulder, and the escape route door opens the wrong way. The sign is incorrect, and it's in the incorrect position. It illustrates everything that I've spoken about over the last 12 months. So yes, it's about paying, because we need to pay for competent people, good contractors, and we don't want to go to the lowest common denominator. Grenfell was caused by 14 million going back to 11 million. You can't take 3 million quid's worth out of a contract at all without cutting corners. So that's why, is where I'm at, and I really do hope the scheme works. But as I say, if everybody's expecting just free information, it's going to be worthless.
Paul and then Jarrett, I think, in terms of raising hands.
Thanks. Yeah, I mean, it basically, I mean, and Anna's example really proves it. Is if the design is done at Gateway 2, you can give it to any contractor because they know what they're quoting for. But if you're then expecting them to do design at a late stage, they've got to look at everything because they've got to check everything. And I'm seeing a lot of specifications that just aren't worth the paper they're written on. But of course, the people who've written them have no responsibility for them. And this is this I suppose is the issue, that design needs to be design, and if you need specialist designers, exactly as Jim says, you pay for it then, because the basis of people giving you free design for things like smoke control and Jim working with the doors is that you get the job. But if you give all that information away and then somebody goes and gets it quoted for elsewhere, then there's, you've wasted that time and money. So what you're actually getting is you're getting the true cost at the right time, rather than getting it done apparently for free.
Jarrett?
Yes. So I'm just going back to what Anna said, and I think Jim touched on this as well, and Paul, regarding how to make sure the as-built information is correct. And then you all started referring back to design and so on, and I do agree with this, but they are two different kind of systems or two different processes, because you have to then design according to all regulations, guidance, specifications, so on. Someone needs to verify, check that design. sign it, ideally as well, approve it. But then you have to monitor the progress on site and capture it. That's the technology. And then you have, unfortunately, often a rework of updating the design. So there's a different stages, completely different processes involved. So that just wanted to touch on, but also because I'm looking at the time, earlier at this meeting, we started saying about design and how we're fitting into the wider population and basically how do we provide the guidance. And this is question to George. How do we publish the guidance, or is just a collection of our meetings and so on the website? Is there actually anything published?
The guidance is always published. When I say published, it's published on the BIM4Housing website. You know, it's. I'm trying to think where else you publish it.
All right, I'll tell you why I asked that question specifically. It's only because I was part of the UK BIM framework, co-author of one of the guidance notes. And so the way they organized it, I don't know if any of you was also part of it, was a group of people like this group here would actually write the guidance and meet separately to resolve issues within the document. But I feel like to really get some engagement and have something to then go to agency or any other body, we actually should write a proper guidance in whatever form. It could then be published on website as a report, blog, or whatever, but it needs to be rigid, needs to be checked, and so on. And there's a lot of knowledge in here and other groups where this can happen, and basically in a similar way of what UK BIM framework did with their guidance notes for ISO 19650. We should, I believe, take all this knowledge accumulated for the last 2-3 years, review it systematically, and then provide guidance. That's what's missing, I think, unless it's there and I'm not aware of it.
Yeah, Richard, do you want to come in on this?
Yeah, I mean, the original guidance we published on the website 18 months ago, that's been open for comment. We've had a lot of comments. It wasn't just from a couple of roundtable sessions. It was numerous meetings online, numerous telephone conversations, numerous emails, which gave us what we had 18 months ago. This time we've had the sometimes 20, 30 people in meetings. That's guidance.
I suppose the question really is, Jarek, I mean, you've obviously seen the guidance that we've produced. Is it what you would call guidance, or is it more of a brain dump from a number of different experts?
Yeah, I don't want to rub anyone the wrong way, but I see it as a brain dump rather than guidance. So it needs structure. It needs to be reviewed systematically, you know,
yes,
and provide proper guidance. I think that's not where we are at the moment.
No, I would agree with that. It is guidance for people to read and interpret and apply, but I think you're right that we've not turned it into something that's formal. Having said that, to actually achieve that is a significant piece of work by somebody. The reason the UK BIM framework was able to do it was because they had funding.
Well, we have now. I hate to say it, but I will anyway. I'm just an example. We've got, you obviously all heard about ChatGPT. You've got various ways of you harvesting the AI to summarize all this information we gathered as a first step of filtering and systemizing this information, creating a checklist. And that can be done fairly quickly. I've done some tests on various documents, comparing documents, and it works very well. I'm using Notion, by the way. So we could do this fairly quickly to analyze, systemize, group information, and create checklists. And then there will be, yes, a lot of work to do it. But we need a guidance, proper guidance documents, I think.
I do agree, and what we've done from the recent workshops is we've asked for a number of people, including I think you've contributed to that, to actually come together afterwards and let's look at things from a data perspective, from process perspective, and also from an application perspective. And what we can hopefully do is and I think your suggestion is a good one. If we can perhaps explore that, because Richard, I'll hand back onto you.
Well, we're yeah. I mean, we're willing to improve it. We put ourselves open to that all the time. When we at every stage, this goes out to people within the meeting, other experts who weren't at the meeting, to add their comments. And to help us improve it. It's not a static document. It's supposed to be dynamic, and any way we can improve that, then obviously we will. But by the same token, as George said, within the constraints that we're all volunteers, and there's only so many hours in the day, and so we all have to work too, don't we?
I mean,
even old people like me.
I know Paul's got his hand up, but I guess, Jared, are you thinking from something like which gets like a BSI or an ISO stamp? So it's got that level of authority or reassurance to people, I guess.
Working towards that goal. That's what I mean. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, Garrett, I'll tell you what. Why don't you and I chat, and you tell me what I should be doing or can be doing, or what you can help me to do to start that track.
Okay.
Yeah, since you've already done it, started it off, gone along that path. If you can point me in the right direction to that, we can give it a whirl, can't we?
As a real dinosaur, and Jarek, 5 years ago, I would be totally with you about having some editor edit the work and giving it provenance. As the years have progressed, I found that because there's so many loopholes in guidance, specifically guidance that's already out there, I can name one in my own sphere, L64, which offers absolutely crap guidance. I could talk about all of the documents that give you guidance to the fire safety legislation in purpose groups of buildings. There's great gaps and anomalies within those guidance. I've started to look at guidance, and I quite like the term brainstorm, because that's how I look at guidance now. And then what I've managed my brain to do now is to decide what fits in with my professional competence and what I can handle and what I have to leave behind. So whilst I totally and utterly agree, in a perfect world, I would love to have guidance that I could really, really put my soul on. There's so much guidance out there that I now almost turn back to the legislation and look for the objectives that I'm trying to achieve, rather than the written word all the time on what I know is someone's contribution, but hasn't quite really understood the basics of what the legislation is trying to achieve.
I think there's something to be said for having the voice from the coalface as well.
Yes,
Jim,
yes.
I think it's okay being very, very formal. That's okay. And there's lots of guidance out there, and regulatory compliance, and God knows what pieces out there with that kind of formality. I think ours is different. It may not be as organised and certainly not as formal, but it's an authentic voice from people who actually know what they're doing, because they're doing it.
Well said. And that's what I meant to capture what we discussed for the last God knows how many months.
Great. Yeah,
Work,
as long as we don't lose that.
Working in a structured way with high standards in mind, but capture what we discussed. That's what I meant.
I think it's important we do. Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree.
Just one last little bit. I have had a little bit of experience with ChatGPT, and I put some specifically where I was looking for a definition in conjunction with something that got printed in ADB. And I was very pleased to find out some of my own text came back at me as part of what ChatGPT actually put on there. But when I really examined what I actually got from artificial intelligence was a brain dump, because it wasn't actually contextual to the question I asked, which was the context of wayfinding in conjunction with fire and rescue deployment signing and signs. I got a full breakdown of what wayfinding is. Most helpful, really helpful. And then I find out that on ChatGPT, a couple of legal people in the United States quoted case law that was on ChatGPT and are now facing prison sentence because it was completely fictitious.
That's why we have you, Jim. That's why we have you, right? And I'm not proposing to use this instead of our brains. I'm proposing to use it to help us to systemize and structure information. But that's why we are having our brains to use it then.
Yeah, totally.
Not just blindly trust it.
Yeah. Artificial intelligence and real intelligence, Jim.
Yeah. Paul White.
I've had my artificial intelligence upgrade, so I think I'm all right. Just going through what you said, I don't know whether anybody clicked on the link that I put in there, but I'm just going to briefly share it. And it's an interesting structure. So if I am able to share. Yes, I am. There we go. So can everybody see that?
Yes.
So basically, they've come up with A to Z essential principles, title and descriptions. And of course, the one that comes in here to me is support firefighting operations, which is an interesting way of putting it because it tends to get ignored. And then it then gives you a very consult with the fire rescue to do this, that, and the other, but it might require additional measures. And then just bear with me because this is a huge document. You go through the different bits and then I've gone too far. Prevent the fire starting, property loss, etc. And I hadn't realised how much there was in this. So I've gone too far. So if we get back to 7.3, it must be, mustn't it? Undertake that. Prevent the fire starting. Lower property loss. Enhanced design. Yeah, where are we? And so then basically it goes through and tells you which of these that the principle applies to, and where it would fit in the thing. And then, as I say, still going. And then you've got that in the different work stages, which I thought was quite an interesting thing. And then you go through the checklist. So we're looking for C. So each one has then got its principles. So I'll just go to C.
Is this a REBA document?
No, it is an FIA document, I think it is.
Right, okay.
And then so principle C, support firefighting operations. And then we get principle evacuation fire, consider fire engineering the whole building, compartmentation and sprinkler rules, fire and rescue service consulted, combustibility, looking at principle P as well. And there's so much in here, but I don't know whether everyone is taking any notice of it, and I suspect that people aren't, but it's a really good sort of checklist. And if you follow this sort of thing, if we could maybe think up the principles that we were looking at, and it literally just goes on, and this is so within this C consideration of firefighting, there are 26 principles that people should be thinking about, and I bet that most people never even thought there was 26 principles to do with whatever it is. And then of course you're so resilient, so you've got to refer to principle Z here and principle C here and all the rest of it. And I think it really probably bears a bit of analysis. We stop sharing.
Yeah, I think you're right. The interesting thing for me is that it talks about the protection of buildings, not the protection of people.
Right, but that's because it comes from the fire industries and therefore the insurers involved.
Understood. Yeah.
But so they may be looking for extra things, but of course this comes down to where does it tell me I have to do that? And actually the bit that people tend to forget is that in design we have a duty of care to the firefighters.
Of course.
Because if they go in, then they need to be protected. Or essentially, if there's no persons reported, they can let your building burn down. You know, these they are important principles. That you know, if there's a chance that there's nobody there and everybody's evacuated, then they're not going to risk their own lives to go and put the fire out. And then you've got business continuity issues. So,
Daz, I'm sorry, Paul.
yeah, no, it's fine.
We're running out of time. Daz,
yeah.
Can I hand back to you for us?
Yeah,
to...
no, that's fine. What like I said, been again really useful. What I'll do, I'll share the notes that I have, and then some of those key questions. The reason I've kind of keep asking them is because they keep changing, and I think it's for me personally as the kind of a designer and kind of advising clients like we all are, it's good for us to kind of know, well, what are the definitions and what are the current requirements. So I'll kind of share my notes and the couple of the three or four main queries that I have. And I also share the slides from the Building Safety Regulator conference that I had, which is useful. And then I think, Paul, what you're trying to say there is also like, you know, if you're talking about producing this guidance for the different things, it's simple things, little things like making sure the terminology that we use across those guidance is the same. And I guess, Richard, that's where the particular wording and the kind of references to certain things, asset attributes, assets, properties, or whatever, is consistent, I guess, across the various guidance that we use, so it doesn't contradict ourselves. And I guess that's where that rigor comes in, I guess, in terms of becoming more guidance documents or kind of standards. But no, thanks again for everyone, and yes, see you all soon.
Yeah, I just picking up on that point, if I could just say before we finish, because Richard at the moment is trying to pull these things together, and what we now want to do is then apply them effectively. So that's why we're looking for probably a little bit of additional help over the next few weeks to pull these things together. I had a meeting this morning with Adam Sanders from Riskbase, who's a data person. A lot of the housing associations use their software to do fire risk assessments and things like that. And what we're talking about, you know, the information section in each of those things with the RACI analysis, we went through with him. I went through with him with Paul Oakley this morning, using showing how the templator could be used to group properties together, so that we end up with a data dictionary, exactly what you just said there, Daz, so that we've got common terminology across the different documents. Because at the moment, each of them has been a brain dump by people that are specialists in, you know, fire doors or whatever. It would make a lot of sense if we can come up with a standard taxonomy between the standard dictionary,
and maybe a sort of a glossary of terms. So
yes,
which is sort of the jargonizes stuff for everyone, because for let's say the lay people who are working on these projects, whether installers, designers, or occupiers.
Yeah, absolutely, because there have been so many times where in these meetings where you're spending 10 or 15 minutes talking about terminology. I mean, Jim mentioned something earlier on about signing and signage. We were literally talking about that for 10 minutes, and there was no agreement at the end.
Okay,
Sure.
well, sounds great. Brilliant.
Good.
Thanks, everyone. Speak to you later.
Jarek, I'll send you an email.
Thanks, everybody. I hope you
Thanks,
found it
bye-bye.
Cheers.
useful.
Thank you.
Cheers.
Always.
Cheers, bye.
Cheers.
Bye bye.
Cheers, Judith.